Money. So we hear all this stuff about blockchain's killer app, and when's that going to happen? When's something useful going to be created on the blockchain? And I think people miss the whole point is that it's already here. It's money. And with this presentation, what my intent is to do is to sort of lay a foundation for everyone to sort of understand why money is such an important foundational element and why this technology sort of provides that. So, in the beginning, there was Bitcoin. Now, this story, believe it or not, actually starts 70,000 years ago. That's when Bitcoin first started the development process. And it, believe it or not, it has its roots in the evolution of humanity. It's when Homo sapiens transcended, this is for real, everyone's gonna laugh at me, but it's when we transcended what's called our biological limits. That's too deep for Friday. Wait, you guys are gonna have your minds blown by the end of this. So anyway, let me set the pace here. So humans we've been around for 2 million years, okay, multiple different species. There was, I can't even remember half the names, but there's like Denisovans and all this sort of shit, Neanderthals. But our species, the one that we all relate to is called the Homo sapiens, and they've been around for about 150,000 of those 2 million years. And about 70,000 years ago, something really interesting happened, and it's sort of linked to the neocortex, the development of the prefrontal cortex of the brain, and also the shrinking of the digestive system, and all sorts of other stuff. And we don't really know how it happened, but it did, and it moved humans, or Homo sapiens, from the middle of the food chain to being this tribe of basically animals that was running around getting hunted or hunting what they could to the top of the food chain in a very short period of time from a historical perspective. And it's also where the age of history begins, about 70,000 years ago. So to set some context, there's a thing called Dunbar's number. Has anyone ever heard of Dunbar's number? You have, okay. Of course you have. You know everything. Basically, there's a British anthropologist called Robin Dunbar, and he's sort of studied that the average social group size and brain function of humans and primates throughout history. And that's what he's come up with. Basically, the human cognitive processing system can tolerate a maximum of 150 stable social connections, which we like to call friends. Now, in the ape world or in the primate world, what you've got is those stable social relationships get created and get maintained through apes sniffing each other, slapping each other, having sex with each other, and all that sort of stuff. And we as humans used to do that as well, and that's a biological constraint. And you know what, that actually also holds true to this day. We can only maintain 150 relationships. We can extend that through technology with Facebook and stuff like that, but you don't really know any more than 150 of those people intimately or well enough to be friends. You can't maintain that. So it was the ability to operate in groups beyond this number that changed 70,000 years ago. And how did that change occur? Through communication. And it's not just any form of communication. So animals, mammals, insects, all that sort of stuff, they all communicate in their own ways to create tribes, to create colonies, to create packs. And the fact is, most of them are actually better than humans at creating these things, or at building, organizing, and creating cooperative, complex colonies. So you look at ants, they can operate in the hundreds of thousands or millions. The interesting piece, though, is that that's all biological. As humans, we can only do 150. The reason Homo sapiens evolved beyond all other species, including all other human species, was because we were somehow able to communicate on a higher level that transcended the biological constraints. And there's two parts to this communication piece. Number one forms the foundation. The second is the derivative of that foundation. And I'll take you through both of those. Part one, complex language. So I'll actually read this out just because I like the sound of my voice. But language may have arisen as a cheap means of social grooming, which is what I was talking about before, where apes kiss each other, slap each other, screw each other. allowing early humans to maintain social cohesion efficiently. Without language, Dunbar speculates humans would have to expend nearly half of their time on social grooming, which would have made productive, cooperative effort nearly impossible. Language may have allowed societies to remain cohesive while reducing the need for physical and social intimacy. So what that means is complex language was something unique to us, and it gave us the time physically and also the space cognitively to start doing things on a higher level. And that's what laid the foundation for this next piece, which is called shared fictions. So, we are the only species on the planet that's able to communicate about, share, and relate to things that don't actually exist. So this is a really important point. Monkeys can lie. So it's been proven monkeys can sort of say that, hey, there's a eagle in the sky, and all the other monkeys run off, and then the monkey takes the banana for himself, and screw you guys. Monkeys can also say, look, there's danger, there's a lion at the river. Only Homo sapiens, only us, can say the lion is the spirit ancestor of our people, or some bullshit like that. Only Homo sapiens, who are from different parts of the world, who don't know each other, who have never met and have no biological reason to actually trust each other, can strike up a conversation, build rapport, and build trust with each other because they're Italian or Chinese or some other fictitious nationality. Only Homo sapiens can use the same reason to band together and build the pyramids, or blow each other up like we did in World War I and World War II. So, shared fictions are languages in and of themselves, and over the millennia, there have been a hell of a lot of shared fictions. Here's a couple of them. Castes, races, kings, queens, gods, religions, nations, laws, corporations. They're all fictions. None of those actually exist except in our shared minds, or whatever delusion we've got. So all of them are actually designed to facilitate cooperation, coordination, and exchange on a broader level. That's why they exist from an evolutionary standpoint. One of the earliest shared fictions was money, and it still exists today. Half of this shit doesn't exist anymore. We've got, I think, a couple kings left, so that's on its way out. Nations will probably be on their way out. We've still got some laws. Gods, I don't know, religions, everything's sort of got its time period, right? But money's the only one that's been there from the start and is still here today because of how important it is for society. Now, before I talk about how money forms the foundation of all society, I want to give people an idea about social order, but also how the central study of all of the sciences that form the fundamentals of every other discipline in the world are basically the study of how particles and all these sort of disparate pieces come together and coalesce to form unified organisms or ordered structures. So physics, for example, is the study of how particles behave and come together to form, create atoms and things like that. Chemists study how elemental atoms and things like that form molecules and larger structures. Biologists, they're fascinated with how cells organize and create complex life forms. Doctors want to know how all of the parts of the body come together to function and coexist. Society is the study of how people come together inside a society. Economists are interested in how people, stakeholders, product, service, societies come together to form markets. And at the core of that study is this language called money. So money and communication. Money at its very basic level is a form of communication, and it's a shared fiction. It doesn't actually exist except for the abstraction in our mind. We've all agreed that it represents value. Now, although many forms of money existed over the years, so from spices to shells, and we've increased the abstractions over time, gold, paper, plastic, and now native digital currencies, money is one of the only forms of communication shared fiction that's stood the test of time because of what it represents: value and exchange. At the foundation of every single society is one thing: it's value. And the ability to exchange that value is what makes society run. When we cooperate, when we do work, when we come together to do anything which has any form of value, and all of our contributions, interactions are exchanges of this value. How society functions is a value exchange. And when you extrapolate that out in layers of complexity, you create societies that are able to exceed Dunbar's number, which is what I mentioned before. It's also important to note that as a society increases in complexity, the value will continue to abstract in order to lower the friction of exchange. So in a society like today could not operate if we were still using spices or shells to facilitate value exchange. It's not possible for a society to increase in complexity with a low level of abstraction when it comes to value exchange. So I'll take you guys through quickly how money's evolved over time. So we start off with barter, and barter's easy between two people because I might want my shoes shined and you might have apples and we might want to trade. You pop a third person in there, that person doesn't want his shoes shined, he wants, sex, but you've got shoes and I've got apples, and all of a sudden, as soon as you start adding nodes to that or numbers to that, things go out of control. And we need things like that we can agree on that all have value. So we moved to commodity money, cattle, salt, sugar, tobacco, cotton. Then we realized, hey, wait a minute, that money's not durable, it's not practical. We paid with spice, but the other person didn't want that spice, or he ate the spice, and it didn't work out. So we moved on to stage one abstractions, shells, rocks. So they allowed people to transact easier, but the problem was they're not very fungible, that word before that we heard, and they're not very practical as sources of money in a more complex society. We moved on to stage two abstractions, metals, bronze, gold, silver, and that was really where society really started to accelerate in its pace of complexity. And the piece that I want to take you through there is now coins. And it's in this modern money, so I've lumped this section here together because modern money is where the trust layer starts to come into play. Is that X amount of thousands of years ago, people realized that we need better forms of exchange of value, so we started moving into metals and knives and things like that. But most people were illiterate, didn't know how to count, didn't know how to basically quantify what an amount of money was. So what happened was emperors came around and said, look, let's stamp a piece of metal, the silver or whatever, with the emperor's guild, and that represents this much value, and people could start to agree on that. But they also used that as a mechanism to avoid fraud, with people saying that this piece was gold and this much gold, and people didn't really carry around scales to weigh how much, but if it was a coin, they were able to lower the friction, increase the abstraction, and make society a little bit more practical. Coins basically persisted for a while until the 1500s, which the Florentine banking families, it actually happened with the Knights Templar before that, but they all got burnt at the stake, and then a couple hundred years of gold came back in. But it was really the Florentine banking families, they started creating gold-backed paper money or promissory notes. And that persisted pretty much for the next 500 years, in and amongst like some gold standards that popped in and out because kings and emperors and all this sort of stuff got killed. But effectively, fiat paper money, really from the early 1900s onwards, started to take precedence in the world. Now, does anyone know what fiat paper money is? It basically means, yep, what is it? Correct. So it's basically backed by nothing except for trust in the issuer or trust in the state in most cases. Now, this has been the defining model up until now. So even plastic money and the digital money that we know of has basically been forms of fiat currency. So they're the three iterations that we've had so far. And they've reigned supreme until 2009, when Mr. or Mrs. or group of or supercomputer, whatever the hell you want to call it, launched Bitcoin. And the timing could not have been better. So, growing up in a digital world, so each generation has been conditioned to believe X is money, gold and paper. And then when we first started moving towards fiat currency, there was a big uproar saying, oh, this shit's not backed by anything. And then when we moved to plastic money, then everyone was like, oh, look, that's not real money, it's credit, it's made up. And then people became okay with that. And then we moved to digital money, and everyone's like, who the hell is going to transact money on the internet? That's just stupid, it's a dumb idea. But now, well, I don't have any kids, but I'm sure some of you guys have kids. You look at your kids and how much cash do they really hold in their wallets these days. Everyone uses a card, tap on, tap off, and now we're moving more towards internet banking. Let me see how I'm going to explain this part. So what's going to happen basically is we might think that these modern currencies that are around now, like your Moneros and your Bitcoins and everything, are internet funny money. In 10, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, people are going to look back and say, what kind of an idiot would have ever carried around a piece of plastic to swipe and to tap and to do all that sort of stuff? How archaic and how stupid is that? Just the way we think of who the hell would have carried around a cow to make a trade to be able to buy some bread, okay? Stuff makes no sense. So I want to quickly go through, and this is probably should have been the other way around, but take you guys through, how money and the attributes of money are important. So there's really three major definitions of money: store of value, abstraction or representation of value, and a measure of wealth or a unit of measure. Now, the attributes of money, as money's evolved, we've added more and more attributes that make it a useful, or make whatever item you're using for money more practical to be used as money. So fungibility just means the ability to exchange a unit, and that unit is the same between you, me, the next person, etc. And that's really important with money, because if money changed every time we changed hands, it'd be very hard to agree on what the value or what value it represented. Portability is obviously a no-brainer. It's hard to carry a cow around. It's easy to carry paper around. It's even easier to carry $1 million on a public key. Durability is really important, so you don't want the money you have to basically, if it rains, and it dissolves like spices did. Cognizability, what that means is the ability to recognize it as money. So this would be, a really poor form of money, because when you look at it, people can argue that it's a remote, it's something else. Divisibility is a really important piece, and this is where the more we move into the digital age, the more divisibility comes into play and makes money more practical. And homogeneity, meaning it's the same throughout. So it's not like a piece of gold, for example, that has bits of silver and all sorts of crap inside it. It's hard to value. So with that, and with understanding that we live in a digital world that's now, the borders are being broken down, and we need more instant, quick, fast exchange and trusted exchange, what's the kind of money we need for the next evolution of society? What's the ideal type of money that's for a world that's becoming increasingly interconnected, for a world that's becoming increasingly complex, that requires a better form of exchange, that's faster and more transparent, for a world that needs a more robust, and anti-fragile is an interesting word, unlike the 2008 financial crisis, trustless form of value abstraction, a world that's moving quickly to one where borders mean less than they used to, and where the language barriers are being broken down to their most fundamental layers of value exchange. Because we're somehow able to communicate on a higher level, transcending our biological constraints. So forget about that crap. What's the kind of money we need? We need a form of value exchange that's open and decentralized, that can be viewed by the public on a ledger that's accessible by everyone, with a token that's digital, divisible, fungible, fixed, and finite in supply. That solves basically all of those problems. And it already exists, and it's been around since 2009. People, I can't underestimate sort of the importance of this thing. So there's a lot of contention around the idea of digital non-backed currencies, and a big part of it's due to their volatility. They say, oh look, that'll never become money because it's too volatile. It's this price one day, it's that price the next day, and that's 100% true. And the other argument that they make is that it's not backed by anything, and I'll get to that. The problem is, before something can become an exchange of value, it needs to become a store of value. And the whole argument around, Bitcoin doesn't have scalability, some of these cryptocurrencies don't have scalability, they can only do so much at this point in time. They're not meant to. You're not meant to have huge throughput. The first layer of this entire transformation or evolution is getting censorship resistance and security sorted out. And without those two fundamentals, you can't create a store of value. But you get those two pieces right, and you build adoption and you create a broader, secure store of value, then you start to have the ability to turn it into an exchange of value using other technologies like sidechains and things like that. So the argument around also that it's not backed by anything, well, really, gold was the only standard of, it's actually been the only trustless store of value in history, and that was not backed by anything, except for the fact that it was real and tangible, it was safe, it was secure, it was, it's fungible, it's finite and scarce, it's recognizable, durable, and it's relatively stable. But guess what? Gold's been around for what now, 5,000 years, and it's also got a market capitalization of 7.5 or 8 trillion US dollars. So gold has all those features, and it's considered a store of value because of all of that. And the beauty of gold is that it's trustless. It's not controlled by anyone, unless you want to say that, you know, whoever controls Fort Knox controls all the gold. But Bitcoin has thus far become the digital store of value because it is censorship resistant. It's got sovereign grade protection, and it's designed to withstand an attack by a large nation state. Nobody's been able to stop Bitcoin now, and I think we've sort of passed that inflection point, because the only way to really stop something like Bitcoin now is to shut down the internet. And I had this argument with someone a couple of weeks ago, which was the internet is bigger than any nation state at the moment. So if, for example, Australia left the internet wouldn't give a shit. But if the internet left Australia, Australia would give a big shit, because we'd be screwed. So it's the same sort of thing that's happening in the cryptocurrency or the digital value exchange space. Over time, as adoption grows, the network value is going to grow, and it will become a median exchange. So it's not an if, it's a when. And the interesting thing about networks is that time is always on the side of the network. So I'm going to take you through a bit of a mathematical piece now to show you why we always miss the mark when it comes to networks. So nobody, period, has ever been able to successfully predict the growth of a network. It includes electricity, it includes telephones, it includes the internet that was called stupid and dumb and everything like that. Facebook, nobody saw that one coming, and money and value exchange is another network effect that everyone's getting wrong. So here's some famous predictions, and I'm going to read these out to you. This guy's an American astronomer and an author. So the truth is, no online database will replace your daily newspaper. No CD-ROM can take the place of a competent teacher, and no computer network will change the way the government works. Might be right about the last piece, but so far, Sir William Preece from the British Post Office. The Americans have need for the telephone, but we don't. We have plenty of messenger boys. I love that one. This is Western Union, Telegram. So this telephone has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered as a means of communication. This device is inherently of no value to us. Well done. This one was actually, there's two parts to this. So this Oxford professor, when the Paris exhibition closes, electric light will close with it and no more will be heard of it. Also, the mayor of France said something as well at the same time, and his one is twofold. He said, as soon as this fair's over, electricity and the Eiffel Tower, they're both going to be gone. They're both still here. Then we've got this one. This one's one of the more famous ones about the internet. Paul Krugman, who's the winner of the Nobel Prize in economics, goes, in 1998 as well, so this is like almost 10 years into the internet, the growth of the internet will slow drastically as the flaw in Metcalfe's law becomes apparent. Most people have nothing to say to each other. By 2005 or so, it will become clear that the internet's impact on the economy is no greater than the fax machine. Awesome. Well done, Paul. You're a genius. This was Wired in 2012. Wired, tired, and expired for 2012. Bitcoin. Yeah, well, not going to happen. And let me explain to you guys why. So this is a really important piece into how the mind works and why we always get networks wrong. Linear growth. So the human mind has developed over hundreds of thousands of years, as I mentioned, to think and perceive linearly. It's how we work. So out in the savannah, when when you're running from a lion, you need to be aware of how quickly you can outrun it or you're dead. So linear thought has developed as a survival mechanism in our minds. And the way that translates is if you got to run 30 steps, you've practically run 30 meters. You add another 30 steps to that, it's roughly 60 meters. And it's just in our DNA how we think. When you look at exponential growth, and this is sort of what's happened in the tech space, and Moore's law is a great example of it. I'm sure everyone's heard of Moore's law, the doubling of the amount of transistors in an integrated circuit every roughly 18 months to 2 years. So what that means is, and this is really important here, how these two lines intersect, is as a species, as humans or Homo sapiens, we think linearly, so we always overestimate what things are going to do in the short term. And just as we start to give up and say, yeah, maybe there's going to be nothing, technology catches up and does its little hockey stick and blows past all of our predictions, because we can't predict what happens on a long term. We always overestimate. There's another saying that goes around is, we overestimate what we can do in a year, and we underestimate what we can do as humans in 10 years. We just don't get compounding, we just don't get exponential growth. And the way exponential growth works is it's effectively, it's a doubling at each step. So the example I use, damn it, I wasn't supposed to show that, is in that linear growth model, 30 steps is 30 meters. Now if you take 30 steps in an exponential format, so if you go 1, 2, 4, 16, and I don't know if anyone saw that, but how far are we after 30 exponential steps?
1 billion.
1 billion. How did you know? God damn it. So it's a billion meters. Again, we just don't think like that. It's not in our DNA. Then you've got quadratic growth, and this is more important with implications around networks. So quadratic growth, it's not the same as exponential. There's some similarities, sort of somewhere in between. And Metcalfe, Bob Metcalfe, who's the guy who created the Ethernet, who also predicted that the internet was going to flop, interestingly enough. The dude invented something and he created a damn law around it and he still got it wrong. The number of potential connections in a network is proportional to the square of the number of participants. Now I know that sounds like a whole lot of crap, but it basically means, I've got a diagram which shows it. In the telephone system, if you've got one line of communication, you've basically got one line of communication. You increase that a little bit, you start to open up the amounts of lines of communication, and that's what happens as it sort of broadens out further. And a good little way to think about it, one connection, 1 equals 1 connection, 10 equals 100 connections, 1,000 equals 10,000 connections. And this is where networks start to hockey stick. And we miss this as humans because we suck. Neither economists, nor bankers, nor astronomers, nor any of us really get this. And the problem also is all of our training, all of the education that we've got that's been developed over the last couple hundred years is all built around linear sort of and local thinking. So everything that we learn, everything that we're conditioned for, doesn't train us for this sort of exponential or quadratic type of growth. And here's something interesting. Bitcoin and blockchains, they're a combination of both quadratic growth in the network sense and exponential growth in the technological sense, because they're using computer science and everything that's practically at the forefront of technology. And this stuff only happens once in a while. The last time it happened was the internet, and nobody can stop the internet unless they actually no, they can't. So then we have the next piece that I'm building on this. Networks versus companies. So networks are fundamentally different to traditional capital infrastructure. We've developed all of these mental models over the last 100 years of how to value what companies do, how to value how capital markets work. But none of them fit with the laws that really govern how networks function. So networks aren't companies. They don't have to worry about profit, loss, shareholders, a board, or customers, or any of that sort of stuff. And a great example of that is the dot-com bubble, where you had companies come along and say, we're going to do X, Y, Z, we're going to do pets.com, we're going to do all this sort of crazy shit. And they came, they bombed, they went, they're gone. But the internet continued to grow during that time because the number of nodes, the number of users kept increasing, and it was well past its point of saturation or its critical mass. It sounds similar to what's going on now. Sorry guys, give me 1 second. I've got so much crap here. I want to make sure we got all of this. I've still got some more So we've been trained to condition things based on profits, earnings, revenues, customers, margins, and all that sort of stuff. Now, when you compare networks and companies again, companies generally have time against them. So they're battling against time, they're battling against new users, incumbents, other competition, all this sort of stuff. Networks don't give a crap about any of that sort of stuff. They just have time on their side, and the longer they're around, the more adoption they have, the more entrenched they become. So apart from some sort of catastrophic failure in the Bitcoin core programming or quantum computers coming out tomorrow, the fact that new technologies come and go doesn't really mean much in the sphere of networks. VHS and Betamax was a really good example. Was VHS took off because they allowed, this is a true story, they allowed people to record porn on them, and by doing so, more people realized that more people were watching porn and buying VHS, and then more manufacturers created VCRs, and then that's how Betamax got beaten. Betamax was actually a better technology than VCR. So it's not necessarily the best technology that wins, and the question is not how good or valuable is the technology today, it's how will it evolve over time, and how valuable really is this decentralized digital means of exchange that's scarce, secure, trustless, open, public, transparent, and divisible, that allows people all over the world to transact value instantly, freely, and cheaply with anyone at any time. And I'll tell you how valuable it is. I mentioned this in this morning's talk, but there's 4 billion people on the planet that are unbanked. We in the first world countries, your major European, the G20, we have access to financial products and financial institutions. There's 4 billion people out there that don't. And I don't know if anyone's heard about the rising billion, but that's basically 1 billion people on the planet in traditionally impoverished zones that are going to cross that poverty line and participate in the broader economy. Now, this is the best example you can think about when comparing traditional financial ecosystems with something that's decentralized and open, is when these people want some banking solutions, do you think Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan or Commonwealth Bank or ANZ is going to go out and give these guys bank accounts? There ain't no money out there, man. These guys have no money, and the banks aren't going to go in there and set up facilities for them to bank, because the banks are a company, they've got shareholders, and I guarantee you tomorrow, if Commonwealth Bank announced that they're going to start opening up branches in, I don't know, fucking Ghana or something like that, not to anything against the Ghana people, but if they just go and do that, the share price will fall because it'll be a money-losing experiment. They're not going to make money. Bitcoin, on the other hand, doesn't give a crap who you are. You could be anyone. All you need is a cheap $50 smartphone and internet, in which, guess what, this rising billion, the 4 billion people that are unbanked, are also going to leapfrog the rest of us with internet services as soon as 5G goes live. Here we are with NBN getting our 25 megabits per second, and they're going to be getting 500 on wireless. So, by the time the banks try and catch up and service these 4 billion people who are now who are now participating on an economic basis with the rest of the world, do you think the banks are going to have any chance of being able to give them facilities? Not a chance. Why in the name of Christ would somebody subject themselves to the rigor, the discrimination, the constraints of traditional banking when they've already got something so much better? So it's there that the technology is actually going to surpass us, not here. No one really cares about Australia or America, where we've already got these facilities. And the funny thing is, probably Australia is even less relevant than America, because in America, I think the statistic was 40% of people in America, of adults in America, don't even have a normal banking or checking account. That's ridiculous. That's a $300 million person economy that is apparently first world. So the last question that I ask is, remember that quadratic equation, what does 1 billion extra people, so let's not talk about the 4 billion, what does 1 billion people on a network do to the network effect when you multiply that out? That's a hell of a lot of nodes. So, I've bashed the hell out of money, I've bashed the hell out of banks. I'll close on a couple things. What comes after money? So we're at the process now, I think, where we're in that sort of bubble territory like we were in the mid to late 90s in the internet, where the internet was going to solve everything, world hunger, world peace, and all that sort of stuff, and then it blew up, and we realized it's going to take longer for all those things. But the things we spoke about in those late 90s are all starting to come to fruition now. And the same thing is going to happen with this technology. It's opening up new frontiers, and there's people running around creating new blockchains and new ideas and saying they're going to solve X, Y, Z. And they're not yet. They might 20 years from now, but the first fundamental layer we've got to build is money. And then on top of money, we're going to build things like, we're going to actually, once we've got value exchange sorted out, and it's secure, and it's trustless, and it's censorship resistant, we'll then start to think about equity, morals, liberty, opportunity, innovation, identity, sovereignty. And it's really, I kind of break it down into three things. The blockchain is, the biggest impact it's going to have is on value exchange, on governance, and on identity. They're the three pieces. All the other stuff is ancillary to that and will come after we get those right. But the real fundamental layer is first value exchange. Nothing goes forward without that. And that's why Bitcoin's, in my mind, such an important thing. So I've been around the space for ages, and I've done all the ICO crap and all that sort of stuff, and I've kind of come full circle and come back to, let's get value exchange right first. And this is where I'm going to shill the business that I'm working on. So, and I'll wrap it up with this so the next speaker can come up. But basically, Stash is the product that I've been working on. I didn't bother pitching it at the beginning because I thought it was irrelevant. But effectively, what we're doing is we're trying to increase the adoption for everyday people in this country and when we expand out to other countries by lowering the barrier to entry to buy cryptocurrencies. So when I asked everyone to raise their hands earlier, I think there was about 25-30% of people, maybe 10% of people didn't raise their hands. So maybe close to half the room has some. The other half don't have any for a couple of reasons. One, it's too hard to freaking buy. Exchanges, brokers, OTC, DEX, centralized exchange, decentralized exchange. There's a million terms, there's a million things that make it difficult for you to buy, like that video the dude showed before with that guy mumbling about Bitcoin. That's one thing. Or the other thing is people don't have the savings or the money. So what we've done is, with our application, the mission is to increase adoption, therefore increase storage of value, and then stabilize this global payment. But the way we do it is basically through kind of like acorns for crypto. So if anyone's ever used acorns, where you go, you tap, and you buy a coffee, and it costs you $3.50, the application rounds up your purchase to the nearest dollar, so it'll take that 50 cents and it'll put it in a managed investment portfolio for you in the case of acorns. We're doing that for crypto. Simple idea. It's not meant to be complex. The whole point of it is to allow the everyday Joe Blow. Like if I look at my sister, for example, she's 23. I think she qualifies as a millennial or a Gen Y or something. She's got Facebook, Snapchat, the whole lot. Even she doesn't know how to buy Bitcoin. My mum, on the other hand, keeps sending me messages about how Bitcoin's dying. Like, look, Bloomberg just said Bitcoin's dying. You better get out. I'm like, shut up, Ma. But she's heard of it and she wants to participate, and she should have a portion of some of her capital allocated to. She's got no idea how to buy it because it's just too hard. So we want, with this application, to make the process simple. So quick plug for what we're doing over there is we are launching in May. We're doing a pre-launch in, actually on Sunday, we're releasing what's called our pre-launch website. And what it's going to be is basically the first 1,000 people, I think it says it here, get 0% exchange fees. So if you are buying Bitcoin and you want to buy Bitcoin or any of those sorts of currencies, note down stash.io, and when the launch site goes live, get on there, because it's not the first 1,000, it's the top 1,000 are going to get 0% exchange fees for a whole 12 months, which means you can buy, sell, do everything you want with your crypto. And we're going to start with Bitcoin and Ethereum initially, and we're going to roll it out to other currencies longer term. But you'll do that with 0% exchange fees. So it's going to save you a crap load of money. And the way we're structuring that leaderboard or that top 1,000 is for every person you refer, you'll go up the list. So that way, if you start a little bit late, you can climb your way up by just sending people across. Anyway, closing thought. Whether you buy Bitcoin through what I've built or you buy it through whatever other service out there's a million of them out there, doesn't matter. What matters is that we adopt this new technology. The more people that are using it, the more people that buy some, own some, transact with it, see the value, the more the network value grows. And it doesn't have to be Bitcoin. You can buy whatever the hell you believe in. If you believe in privacy, go buy Monero. If you believe in this world of decentralized applications, go buy Ethereum. Go buy something, but participate in it, because that's how this technology is going to move forward, not by running around and talking to each other and not using it. Q&A time. Silence.
You made it
Awesome.
silent.
What's the premise behind the stash concept? Like you just said acorns, you're going to pinch 50 cents off a transaction and throw it into how are you going to convert that to Bitcoin?
We'll just buy it on your behalf. Simple as that. So you'll have
In quantities.
correct. So what will happen is, let's say there's 1,000 people on there, and everyone's saving 50 cents, 60 cents, $1 here, bits and pieces there. At the end of the week, the average person might have $10.50 in savings. We'll debit that. We'll debit it in pieces anyway, and then at the end of the week, once that's aggregated, we'll buy Bitcoin at the price on Friday. And it's effectively it's the best strategy over the years. This is funny. Everyone tries to trade Bitcoin and pick tops and pick bottoms and all that sort of stuff, and they always get it wrong. Even I was one of those idiots. The amount of money I've put on like leveraged trading platforms just to try to be a genius and short it at the right time and hedge and do all sorts of crap, I've just burnt through money like a moron. So the best strategy is just buy, accumulate, and just put it aside. This is your hedge against the stupidity of governments, the stupidity of central management, and fiat currency, basically. Now, don't go and put all your money into it. And this is why we created Stash the way we did, is just through your spare change. You just put stuff that you wouldn't normally notice. And if you did that, and let's say you were a complete idiot, and you did it throughout 2013, and you bought all of your Bitcoin at the peak of when it hit $1,100, to this day, you'd still be laughing. So the whole point of it is just put some aside. Simple as that. And that's what we want to do. So we want to automate the process and help people use non-risk money effectively to get involved in the market.
Dollar cost averaging.
Basically, that's all it is. Just over time. That's it. And it's, in fact, it's not just the best strategy in Bitcoin. It's the best strategy across everything. Effective. Sorry?
It actually goes into compound saving, which is fantastic.
Exactly.
It's the most powerful force. That's the whole thing was about compound.
Thank you. You noticed that. Yeah.
I have a question for you, Alex. From my understanding, there's about 1,200 news agencies in Australia that are
Blue Shift.
actually selling the Bitcoins.
Yep. There is. Yeah. So the only difference there is that there's what's the fee? Do you know what the fee is? 5%?
5%.
I think it's 5%. Yeah. So yeah.
So now's the question: how much are you going to charge after the first year?
80%. 80%. No, I'm kidding. Now look, we're probably going to sit somewhere between 0.5 or 1%, maybe 1.5%. We're just trying to keep it lean and sharp. That's the mission that I've got behind this is increasing adoption. That's the whole point of it. There is a business model because we do make money on on the spread, irrespective. So that there'll be a small buy-sell spread, but at the end of the day, I don't think there needs to be exorbitant commissions on the way in and on the way out, and that's going to get tighter as more participants get into this market anyway. Is the days of charging 5% in and out are probably numbered, and they can do it now because it's hard to buy. But when we start making it easy, what's going to happen is we're going to try and lead the market in lowering those fees over time for everyone.
Well, that's education. I mean, Western Union is still charging 30%.
I know, right?
In Woodridge.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just ignorance towards it. Well done. Do you take investors?
We actually just closed the round, but I can have a talk to you a bit later about how we're doing things moving forward.
Cool.
So yeah, 100%. Come see me. Any other questions?
Can you try and address the backup of the private keys issue?
Yeah. So stage 1 of the product is in the spirit of simplicity. We've got some. We've got basically as cutting edge as you can get. The only way for somebody to hack our database is they can't. They would need to get multiple trustees, banks, our back-end guys, and all that sort of stuff in the same room with guns to their head to make them give up the private keys, which each person knows a portion of the private key, etc. So initially, it will be all on our stored servers. So we'll be the custodian for that. But the second stage of development will be a native wallet, much like Jax, if anyone's ever used Jax as a cryptocurrency wallet. So we'll be one of the first applications, and definitely the first in Australia, to be an exchange app, but also a wallet app. So you'll be able to purchase it with your spare change, do all the stuff that you'd normally do, and then just move it to your secure wallet, which is your wallet, and then you'll have, the onus will be on you to store the private keys, etc., for security.
Why'd you build it that way? I mean, that's the whole problem with the Japanese exchange and why they got hacked. Mount Gox.
Well, back in the Mt. Gox days, there's actually a lot of contention around how that happens. To run an exchange and to have everybody have their own private key is basically a no-starter, because you need to, in order to, exchanges need to be centralized to buy bulk, okay? But from a purchasing standpoint, now it doesn't mean you need to hold your stuff on an exchange. So that's the big difference here is, you buy and then you move it. And that's the whole point. And as a business, it's actually, I'd rather people just hold their own private keys, because then the onus doesn't sit on us from a security standpoint. Although initially, our target market is not the people who know anything about private keys, or know how to store their private keys, or know how to have any security around their own sovereign pieces of, I guess, security. So to start off with, we're not, but it'll blend into that. And then for the users who are happy with us managing that stuff for them, they can maintain that top layer. And for the users who want to keep their own privacy or keep their own private keys, they can move into that layer. Does that answer it?
It does.
Cool. It's an adoption thing. It's trying to get to
it off the public repository and offline for a period of time until you access it.
100%. And the beauty is, because we're not an exchange, we're more like a broker. We're more about a one-way buy. As soon as we buy, the stuff goes on cold storage, and the private key is sharded across different locations and all that sort of stuff. Gentleman behind you had a quick question?
Yes, you mentioned, how do you become a node, as you said earlier, your computer on overnight?
Yeah, so when I said node, I meant it more in the sense of become a user, but to run a Bitcoin node, you'd have to download the entire blockchain, and then just make sure it's always connected to the internet, and it's always on. And then all you do is you support the network. In being a full node, you support the network for more throughput, transactions, faster connection time, and all that sort of stuff. So
you didn't mean that, though. You meant node in terms of...
I meant node just being a participant. Yeah, correct. So that's not what I meant. So I'm not telling everyone here to go download a freaking 160 gig blockchain and then turn your computer on the whole time. That's not what I'm saying. It's just be a participant. Buy some Bitcoin, hold some Bitcoin, or Ethereum, or whatever the hell you want to hold, but participate in it, because that's the way this industry is going to grow. And that's the way we're going to be able to have our own sovereignty over our own money, as opposed to just walking around with paper that you can wipe your butt with. Any last questions? Oh, one more.
Yeah. With all the new coins that keep coming out,
Yep.
the government's looking at it.
Yep.
You're going, surely there must be a risk that if you're investing in Bitcoin or any of the others like that, that the government is going to issue, so this is going to be the one that we're going to support and we're going to back up with some from be it whatever. Is that a risk in reality?
Okay.
If that
So
was going to work out that way, how would that work out?
let's clarify the question. So what you're asking is, if the government's going to back a particular one, that the rest of them are going to fall away?
So this is like,
Or issue, 100%. The governments will 100% issue their own. I had a meeting with someone from the OECD the other day, and they're definitely, that's cooking up. And I reckon probably this year we'll see a central government issued cryptocurrency. The funny thing is, it's not a cryptocurrency, except that it might just be on some private blockchain or whatever that they have control of. But that doesn't solve anything, because it's still controlled by that central government, and they can dictate the inflation, the deflation, whatever the supply or any of the pieces around it. The thing that's different about Bitcoin is you could go, and if he was one of the guys working on the Bitcoin code, I could go pop a cap in him, and basically Bitcoin will continue to operate. If we did that on the central bank, we go pop a couple central bankers, that whole thing would fall apart. So it's a central point of failure versus a decentralized system which doesn't have a central point of failure. There's miners, there's users, there's coders all over the place who are known and unknown, anonymous and non-anonymous, that are contributing and participating in this, which it will always sit outside of the traditional monetary system. What will happen though is, and this is already happening, there's a state government in America that's just passed a law to accept taxes to be paid in Bitcoin, for real. So what they're doing is they're trying to stockpile Bitcoin. So just like the smart governments of days gone by were the ones stockpiling gold. It's a hedge, it's an asset. We're moving into an age now that is a digital age where you're going to want to stockpile some form of digital gold, and the smarter countries are going to start putting that stuff aside because it's global. Doesn't matter. Gold is not just in one place, so that's why they hold that. And there'll be, Fort Knox versions. Like if you research like how some of the people who are holding a lot of Bitcoin hold Bitcoin, you'll start to see that this thing's more like, I'm talking Swiss vaults under mountains that are stored in like vacuum chambers which have never been near the internet or near electricity, so you could nuclear bomb half of Switzerland and the private keys would survive. Like,
and the extent that some people go to fragment their code and whatever. I read an article about somebody flying over a border somewhere that they destroyed the code right at this particular point.
But that's Zcash. That's what they do with Zcash, because there's some remnant, I don't know the technicality of it, but there's some remnant in the process that need to destroy all this sort of stuff. Yeah. So there's crazy shit going on. But yeah, does that answer your question?
Not really, but I didn't really ask the question.
Yeah, okay. Either did I. Well, correct, but this is potentially, so from a transactional standpoint, if a government brings something out, it will have a transactional value, but when something's got a high velocity, when we exchange it a lot, it's not a store of value, completely different. So it's a different use case. So although there might be a bunch of different cryptos that come out now, that's great, they can do that and they'll all have their promise and their use case and all that sort of stuff, but what they're missing is long-term network effects. So with Bitcoin, you've got infrastructure, you've got miners, you've got hundreds of millions of dollars in mining equipment around the world. You've got all of the wallet infrastructure is built around, all the exchange infrastructure is built around it. If you want to buy any other coin at the moment, you need to buy Bitcoin or Ethereum first and trade into it. So it's basically the reserve currency for everything that's happening in digital space. So for something to overtake all of the network effects it's got, so it doesn't have just one network effect, it's got first mover, it's got all of these pieces that I've just mentioned, it's going to take a lot, or it's going to have to take a catastrophic failure of Bitcoin in order for something else to surpass it and to have as much network effects as it does. The only reason Ethereum has grown so big is that it solves a different problem than Bitcoin does. Bitcoin only gives a shit about one thing, and that's making sure that the money is secure or the value exchange is secure between me and you. That's all it does. It doesn't do anything else. It's not built for anything else. Ethereum, on the other hand, couldn't give two shits about the money side of things. All they care about is building a decentralized computer that allows people to build applications on it. So if you look at, this might help clarify things. In Bitcoin, the protocol exists to support the token that functions on the protocol. In Ethereum, the token exists to facilitate the operation of the protocol. It's inverse. So when it comes time to governments to issue currencies and all that sort of stuff and other tokens and all this stuff, they will do their thing and they'll operate in whatever way they're operating. But I know for me, and it's probably the case for most people, is I want my money to be secure. And if I'm sending money to Bob or Justin or anyone else like that, I want that transaction to be secure. And I want my wealth or my storage of wealth to be on something that is really like immutable, secure and all that sort of stuff. And nothing at the moment has or is anywhere near displacing. And probably the more it gets entrenched in the 4 billion of unbanked, the more it will become the store of value from a digital perspective. And the more governments are going to realize that this is becoming entrenched because now Wall Street's getting involved, fund managers are getting involved, VCs are getting involved, family offices are getting involved, the more they're all holding it and considering it as an asset or as a hedge against traditional markets. And what will happen is governments will issue their own currencies for transactional purposes, but they'll hold some Bitcoin, most probably, alongside their holdings of gold and other treasuries and bonds, etc., as part of their asset bucket. Does that answer it more? Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, I'm going to give the microphone back and shut up now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.